When you're staring at a list of high-end NAS boxes and wondering whether any of them will actually make your video production workflow smoother, the hesitation is real. You've probably heard the buzz about enterprise-grade reliability and 25 GBE speed, but the question that matters most is, will this machine fit into the day-to-day rhythm of a busy edit bay without turning your budget into a black hole? I'm going to walk through the practical side of the Synology DS1825 Plus so you can see where the value lives, where the hidden costs hide, and whether the promise matches the reality of a real post-production house. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the DS1825 Plus sits in the 8-bay diskless segment, which means you're buying a chassis and the software stack, but you still have to source the drives yourself. That's a deliberate choice by Synology to let teams pick the exact mix of capacity, performance, and redundancy they need. In a typical 4K or 8K workflow, most shops end up using a combination of high-capacity SATA drives for archive footage and a few fast SSDs for active projects. The fact that the unit doesn't bundle drives can be a blessing if you already have a drive inventory, but it also adds a planning step that new to NAS teams might overlook. In practice, you'll spend a few hours sizing the RAID configuration, slotting the drives, and making sure the firmware is up to date before you even get to editing. The most compelling part of the DS1825 Plus 4 video teams is the claim of supporting 50-plus concurrent users editing 4K per 8K projects. In the field I've seen, that translates to a handful of editors pulling raw footage from shared storage while colorists and VFX artists are simultaneously rendering proxies. Synology's DSM-OS uses a combination of SMB3, NFS, and ISCSI to present the same data pool to all those users, and the built-in caching mechanism can keep a hot set of files on the internal SSD cache. The result is that an editor working on a 30-minute 8K sequence can drag a clip onto the timeline with barely any latency, even when 3 other users are doing the same thing on neighboring workstations. That's not a speculative benchmark, it's the kind of scenario you'll actually run into when you have a deadline and multiple editors need the same source material. Scalability is another real-world factor. The DS1825 Plus starts at 160 terabytes when you fill all 8 bays with 20 terabytes drives, but Synology sells expansion units that let you push the total capacity up to 360 terabytes. For a studio that expects its library to double every few years, that headroom is useful because you can add the expansion nodes without replacing the whole system. The catch is that each expansion unit requires its own power and cooling, and you'll need to allocate rack space for them. In a cramped production office, that can be a deal breaker unless you have a dedicated server rack. Also, the 25 GBE network cards are optional upgrades. The base model ships with 1 GBE, which is far from enough for multiple 4K streams. If you want to truly leverage the mission-critical reliability claim, you'll need to invest in a 10 GBE or 25 GBE switch and ensure every editing workstation is wired accordingly. That's a non-trivial cost that often gets left out of the headline price. Data protection is where the DS1825 Plus leans into its enterprise badge. Synology offers high availability clustering with automated failover, so you can pair 2 units and have one take over instantly if the other goes down. In practice, that means a sudden drive failure or a power glitch won't halt your edit sessions, the other node picks up the IP address and the shared folders stay online. The downside is the added complexity of configuring and maintaining the cluster. You'll need a second chassis, duplicate drives, and a solid understanding of Synology's HA settings. For a small indie team, the overhead of setting up a cluster might outweigh the peace of mind, especially if you already have a solid backup regime in place. Let's talk about the day-to-day usability. DSM's web interface is clean and feels more like a consumer NAS than a corporate server, which is a plus for teams that don't have a dedicated IT person. Creating shared folders, assigning user permissions, and enabling snapshot replication can be done in a few clicks. However, the snapshot feature that protects against accidental deletions does consume a noticeable amount of storage if you keep a long history. In a production environment where you might retain 3 days of snapshots for a fast-moving project, you'll need to allocate roughly 510% of your total pool just for that safety net. That's a trade-off you have to factor into your capacity planning. Who should buy the DS1825 Plus? If you run a mid-size post-production house, a corporate media department, or an educational video lab that regularly handles multi-camera 4K or 8K footage and needs multiple editors working simultaneously, this NAS hits the sweet spot. The ability to scale storage without swapping out the entire chassis, the optional high-speed networking, and the HA clustering give you a platform that can grow with.